Welcome to Leading by Example, Upholding Standards Without Compromise. I am your host, Dr. Vaughn, inspiring excellence, one lesson at a time. Are you ready to be better within your world and become the standard bearer within your organization or wherever you are? Leaders, aspirants, every one of you, all of us influence our culture, the organization's culture, our workplace's culture through actions taken both inside and outside of the workplace. I founded Ontero Solutions upon integrity, customer satisfaction, and attention to detail, specifically executive coaching and leadership development. Join in for fun, practical, and educational stories as I share lessons, both the good and the bad, that I have learned in my 20 years of leadership and management experience. Leading by Example starts now. Everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of our radio show where we dive into the real issues that challenge our standards, inspire change, and help us lead by example in a world that sometimes forgets what really matters. I'm your host, Dr. Vaughn, and I'm thrilled to have you with me as we explore these important topics together. Have you ever wondered why it feels like our values are often compromised? Whether it's in our workplaces, in politics, or even in our personal lives, why do we sometimes see principles being pushed aside for quick wins or convenience? These are the kinds of questions we're tackling on this show, Leading by Example, Upholding Standards Without Compromise. Throughout our series, we'll dig deep into the tough issues, offering insights, answers, and most importantly, solutions. So are you ready to explore how we can all lead by example? Well, let's get started. So today, we're concluding our series titled Upholding the Unspeakable, Tackling Taboo Topics and Leadership Ethics. This series was all about giving you practical advice on how to handle ethical dilemmas as a leader so that you can create a transparent, accountable, and ethical atmosphere in your organization. In our first episode, The Ethics of Whistleblowing, we looked at the challenges and impacts of whistleblowing on leadership and organizational culture. In the second episode, Navigating Nepotism and Favoritism, we dove into the tricky waters of nepotism and favoritism in organizations and explored how leaders can ethically manage personal and professional boundaries. Now, in this final episode of this series, titled Leadership During Moral Crises, we will discuss how leaders can effectively handle situations that severely test moral principles such as company scandals or ethical breaches. Our discussion points for today's episode, we will define moral crises. What constitutes a moral crisis in a leadership context? The second discussion point, we'll discuss strategies for crisis management. What are some steps and strategies that leaders can adopt to manage and mitigate crisis ethically? And rebuilding trust. How can you restore trust and credibility after a moral failing within the organization? So you all know I love a good story. So here we go. And y'all know I love King David. So spoiler alert. So a biblical story that relates well to the topic of leadership during moral crises is the story of King David and Bathsheba. Actually, we talked about this I believe it was our first episode in this series. So again, I told you I love King David. So here we go again. This story illustrates how a leader can face a moral crisis, the consequences of moral failings, and the steps needed to seek forgiveness and begin the process of restoring trust. King David was one of the most revered leaders in the Bible. Leaders, we can learn a lot from King David. He faced a significant moral crisis when he committed adultery with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, which was one of his loyal soldiers. To cover up his sin after Bathsheba became pregnant, King David arranged for Uriah to be placed on the front lines of battle, ensuring his death. This series of actions represented a grave moral failure on David's part. So Nathan, the prophet Nathan, rebuked David. He confronted David, telling him a parable that illustrated the gravity of his sin. David, upon realizing the depth of his wrongdoing, expressed deep remorse and repentance. So I'm going to read to you all the story, the rebuke. And this is taken from 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 1 through 14. So the Lord sent Nathan, the prophet, to tell David this story. There were two men in a certain town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned a great many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but one little lamb he had bought. He raised that little lamb, and it grew up with his children. It ate from the man's own plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. One day, a guest arrived at the home of the rich man. But instead of killing an animal from his own flock or herd, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it and prepared it for his guest. King David was furious and said, "As surely as the Lord lives," he vowed, "any man who would do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one he stole and for having no pity." Then Nathan said to David, "You are that man. The Lord, the God of Israel, says, I anointed you king of Israel and saved you from the power of Saul. I gave you your master's house and his wives and the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. And if that had not been enough, I would have given you much, much more. Why then have you despised the word of the Lord and done this horrible deed? For you have murdered Uriah the Hittite with the sword of the Ammonites and stolen his wife. From this time on, your family will live by the sword because you have despised me by taking Uriah's wife to be your own. This is what the Lord says. Because of what you have done, I will cause your own household to rebel against you. I will give your wives to another man before your very eyes, and he will go to bed with them in public view. You did it secretly, but I will make this happen to you openly in the sight of all Israel. Then David confessed to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, Yes, but the Lord has forgiven you, and you won't die for this sin. Nevertheless, because you have shown utter contempt for the word of the Lord by doing this, your child will die. Despite his repentance, David faced severe consequences for his actions, including turmoil within his family and the death of the child born to Bathsheba. However, David's genuine repentance and his efforts to make amends were the first steps in restoring his relationship with God and his leadership role. Over time, David continued to lead Israel, although the scars of his actions remained. So the moral of this story, it highlights several key aspects or morals relevant to this episode, which is titled Leadership During Moral Crisis. The first one is recognition of moral failings. Even the most respected leaders can fall into moral crisis. Nobody is exempt. Acknowledging the failure is the first crucial step. The second moral is the importance of repentance and accountability. David's story shows the importance of taking responsibility for one's actions and seeking forgiveness. And the third moral is rebuilding trust. While consequences are inevitable, sincere efforts to make amends and restore relationships can help rebuild trust and credibility. This story can serve as a powerful illustration during our discussion on how leaders can navigate moral crisis, manage the fallout ethically, and work toward restoring trust after a significant failure. So this takes us to our first discussion point. Define moral crisis and what constitutes a moral crisis in a leadership context. So the definition, a moral crisis is a situation that tests the ethical foundations of leadership and requires careful, principled decision-making to navigate successfully. A moral crisis occurs when a leader or an organization faces a situation that challenges their ethical principles, their values, and their integrity. It typically involves a conflict between what is right and wrong, and the decisions made during this crisis can have significant consequences for the leader, the organization, and all those affected. Just think about the story we just heard about King David. So you say, what are the signs? What are the key characteristics of a moral crisis? So here are 5 I'm going to give you. The first one being an ethical dilemma. A moral crisis typically involves a conflict between competing ethical values or principles. For example, a leader may have to choose between upholding transparency and protecting the company's reputation. In a moral crisis, the right course of action is not always immediately clear, and leaders may struggle to balance competing interests such as the well-being of employees versus financial pressures. Number two, in a moral crisis, there's a violation of ethical standards. A moral crisis often arises when a leader or organization engages in actions that violate ethical norms or standards. And this could include actions like fraud, corruption, discrimination, or other forms of misconduct. The crisis may stem from a personal failing of the leader, such as dishonesty, abuse of power, or other unethical behavior that conflicts with the organization's values. And then such crises typically lead to a loss of trust from stakeholders, including employees, customers, shareholders, and the public. The erosion of trust is often one of the most challenging aspects to address both during and after a moral crisis. Another characteristic is public scrutiny. Moral crises are often highly visible and attract significant attention from the public, the media, and stakeholders, because people want to know the tea, right? This scrutiny can amplify the pressure on leaders to act decisively and ethically. Stakeholders, including employees, customers, shareholders, and the public, demand accountability from leaders during a moral crisis. The leader's response is crucial in determining whether trust can be restored. The long-term consequences of a moral crisis can be long-lasting, thereby affecting the organization's culture, employee morale, customer loyalty, and the overall reputation of the organization. In some cases, the consequences can lead to legal actions, financial losses, or even the downfall of the organization or the leader involved. So one such example of moral crisis in leadership, we're going to talk about one in specific. It's a corporate scandal. So when companies are involved in fraud, corruption, or unethical business practices, this leads to a loss of credibility and trust, which we previously discussed. But here's the one about Wells Fargo I want to share with you. It's the Wells Fargo fake accounts scandal. I thought this was interesting because probably like you, I'm a customer, okay? So in 2016, it was revealed that Wells Fargo was one of the, one of the largest banks in the United States, had been engaging in unethical practices where employees opened millions of unauthorized bank and credit card accounts without customers' knowledge or consent. This was driven by intense pressure to meet aggressive sales targets set by the company's leadership. The scandal exposed serious ethical lapses within Wells Fargo's leadership. The pressure to meet unrealistic sales goals led employees to engage in fraudulent behavior to keep their jobs and achieve bonuses. This widespread misconduct was not only unethical, but also illegal, as it involved the misuse of customers' personal information. Wow, right? Wells Fargo's actions severely damaged the trust between the bank and its customers. Customers were charged fees for accounts they did not authorize or even know existed, leading to significant financial and emotional harm. The scandal called into question the integrity of the entire Wells Fargo organization. The scandal also led to significant public outcry, government investigations, and substantial legal consequences. Wells Fargo was fined billions of dollars by various regulatory bodies, including the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The bank also faced numerous lawsuits and was required to compensate affected customers. And then lastly, it impacted leadership accountability. The scandal led to the resignation of Wells Fargo's CEO and other top executives. The board of directors and senior management were criticized for fostering a toxic sales culture that prioritized profits over ethical behavior and customer well-being. The leadership's failure to address and prevent the fraudulent practices further exacerbated the crisis. So next, we're going to talk about the impact on Wells Fargo's reputation. So Wells Fargo's reputation was deeply tarnished by this scandal. They're still trying to recover. The bank, once considered a pillar of stability and trust in the financial industry, became synonymous with corporate greed and unethical practices. Restoring its reputation has been an ongoing challenge for Wells Fargo. And in response to the crisis, Wells Fargo has had to implement significant reforms, including changes to its sales practices, leadership, and corporate culture. The company has focused on rebuilding trust by emphasizing customer service, transparency, and ethical behavior in its operations. So that was a lot, y'all. Hopefully none of you were impacted too heavily, but that was huge. I remember when that story broke, and it was crazy. I'm still in shock from today over the fact that it happened. 3 lessons from the Wells Fargo crisis. One being the cost of a toxic culture. The Wells Fargo scandal underscores the dangers of a toxic corporate culture where employees are pressured to meet unreasonable goals at the expense of ethical behavior. And it highlights the importance of aligning company goals with ethical practices and the well-being of employees and customers. The second lesson is leadership responsibility. The crisis also emphasizes the critical role of leadership in setting the tone for ethical behavior within an organization. Leaders must be accountable for the culture they create and the impact it has on both employees and customers. We have one more, but we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the long-term recovery of Wells Fargo. Come on back and we're going to finish this up. All right, so we're back, y'all. The third impact was long-term recovery. The Wells Fargo scandal demonstrates that recovering from a moral crisis is a long and challenging process. It requires more than just financial compensation to the people that they hurt. It involves rebuilding trust, changing organizational practices, and demonstrating a genuine commitment to ethical behavior. The Wells Fargo fake account scandal is a powerful example of how a moral crisis can arise from systemic issues within an organization, leading to severe consequences for leadership, employees, customers, and the company's reputation. It highlights the importance of ethical leadership, transparency, and a corporate culture that prioritizes doing the right thing. So, what is the importance of managing a moral crisis? Well, how a leader responds to a moral crisis can define their legacy and the future of the organization. Some episodes back, we talked about leadership legacy and the importance of, how doing the right thing impacts that, and some things that leaders can do to, positively impact their legacy. If you're interested, go back and check it out. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Effective crisis management involves recognizing the crisis, taking responsibility, communicating transparently, and taking corrective actions to mitigate the damage and begin the process of rebuilding trust. That's a lot, but it's so essential. And this brings us to our second discussion point, which is, what are the strategies for crisis management? What are steps and strategies that leaders can adopt to manage and mitigate crisis ethically? So be patient, y'all. It's a long list. It's 13. There's no mnemonic. So again, please be patient. When facing a moral crisis, it's crucial for leaders to manage and mitigate the situation ethically, to protect the organization's integrity, maintain stakeholder trust, and pave the way for recovery. So here's our first step or strategy that a leader can adopt. Number 1, first and foremost, acknowledge the crisis early. As soon as a potential moral crisis is identified, leaders should acknowledge it promptly. Delaying recognition only serves to worsen the situation and further erode trust. Leaders should also take ownership of the issue, even if it involves uncomfortable truths. This shows integrity and commitment to resolving the problem. Number 2, leaders should communicate transparently. Clear, honest, and timely communication with all stakeholders is essential. Explain what happened. Talk about the steps that are being taken to address it and what will be done to prevent such a lapse in the future. And also engage with the stakeholders, including the employees, investors specifically, and the public to address their concerns directly. Avoid evasive language and be as transparent as possible. Number 3, assemble a crisis management team. This is one that, a lot of us are familiar with because that's the first thing, we hear about when organizations get in trouble, a statement, the company statement that goes out from the crisis management team. So as a leader, you assemble this team and you gather a team of trusted advisors, including legal, PR, and ethics professionals to guide the crisis management process. This is your integrated project team, if you will. And this team should have the expertise and authority to make decisions quickly and effectively. And when you put together this team, you want to make sure that you clearly define the roles of each team member to ensure a coordinated response. The team should work together to manage both the immediate crisis and the long-term strategy. Number 4, conduct a thorough investigation. Conduct a comprehensive investigation to understand the underlying causes, the root causes of the crisis, not just the surface symptoms, but the root causes, because this helps in addressing the problem at its source and preventing future occurrences. And then you want to engage independent auditors. If necessary, bring them in to help ensure that the investigation is impartial and credible. Number 5, make ethical decisions. Prioritize ethics over expediency. And this is difficult because the op tempo is always super duper fast, but this is critical to the organization's success. And every decision made during the crisis, prioritize those ethical considerations over short-term gains or quick fixes. No band-aids here. This approach may involve difficult choices, but it will help preserve the organization's long-term integrity. And then you want to consider all the stakeholders. We keep talking about stakeholders, y'all. It's so super important. If your organization does not have a stakeholder engagement and management plan, you need to build one. And Ontero Solutions can help you with that. You want to ensure that the decisions made take into account the well-being of all stakeholders, including employees, customers, and the community. Investors, we talk about that. Almost everybody in your organization is a stakeholder. Number 6, take swift action to rectify any immediate harms caused by the crisis. And this could include compensating affected parties, recalling faulty products, or issuing public apologies, a genuine public apology. You can strengthen policies and controls or implement new policies or strengthen the existing ones to prevent similar issues in the future. This also involves revising codes of conduct, enhancing oversight, or improving compliance mechanisms. Number 7 happens to be my favorite. Lead with integrity. Leaders must always lead by example, demonstrating ethical behavior in all actions and decisions. This helps to rebuild trust and reinforce a culture of integrity within the organization. And while you're doing that, maintain composure. Stay calm and composed throughout the crisis. Panic or reactive decisions can exacerbate the situation and lead to further mistakes. Inhale, exhale, and breathe, relax, right? Stay calm. Number 8, communicate with empathy. Show empathy. Recognize the impact of the crisis on those affected. Genuine empathy. And communicate with compassion. Acknowledge the pain or harm and express sincere regret. Avoid corporate jargon and speak in a way that resonates on a human level with the stakeholders. Personalize the messaging to show that the organization genuinely cares. Number 9, monitor progress and adjust the strategy as needed. You'll want to continuously monitor the progress of the crisis management effort. Ensure that corrective actions are being implemented effectively and that they are having the desired impact. And you do this by tracking the implementation of these strategies. And above all, be flexible. Be prepared to adjust your strategy as new information emerges or the situation evolves. Be agile. Flexibility or agility is key to navigating the complexities of a crisis. Number 10, plan for long-term recovery. No overnight success wins here. It takes a while to rebuild trust. So after the immediate crisis has been managed, focus on long-term efforts to rebuild that trust and restore the organization's reputation. This could involve engaging in community outreach, improving transparency, or launching new initiatives to demonstrate a commitment to ethical practices. And learn from what happened. Conduct a post-crisis review to identify lessons learned. This is something that's usually missed, but capture those lessons learned and use these insights to strengthen the organization's resilience and better prepare for future challenges. Number 11, reinforce the ethical culture. Foster an ethical culture in the aftermath of a crisis is so essential to reinforce a culture of ethics and integrity within the organization. You got to snap back quickly. Provide ongoing ethics training, encourage open dialogue, and reward ethical behavior from those that are ethical. And then you want to ensure that there are clear accountability mechanisms in place for all levels of the organization. This helps to maintain high ethical standards and prevent future crises. Almost close, y'all. We're almost done. Number 12, engage in transparent reporting. So share the outcomes of the crisis management process with stakeholders. This includes what was learned, what actions were taken, and how the organization will ensure such issues do not reoccur. And be open to feedback, which is tough, but encourage feedback from stakeholders on how the crisis was handled and use it to improve future responses. And then the last one, seek external support when needed. So don't hesitate to seek help from external crisis management experts, legal advisors, or PR firms if the situation requires specialized knowledge or support. Engage with regulatory bodies transparently and cooperatively to address any legal or compliance issues that arise from the crisis. And this is something, collaborating with regulators is something that you want to do as part of your business continuity, period. By following these steps and strategies, leaders can effectively manage and mitigate moral crises in an ethical manner, helping to restore trust, protect the organization's integrity, and ensure organizational long-term success. This brings us to our final discussion point. You may say, how do I rebuild trust? How can we restore trust and credibility after a moral failing within the organization? That's always the toughest thing, not just within the organization, but even within relationships. Like with King David, it's a hard thing to do. Restoring trust and credibility after a moral failing is a challenging but essential process, and it requires a combination of sincere apologies, transparent actions, and long-term commitments to change. Here's how organizations can approach this process. The first thing you'll want to do is you want to acknowledge the wrongdoing. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. Openly acknowledge the moral failing. Leaders should admit the mistake or misconduct without downplaying its significance, because this transparency is crucial for demonstrating accountability with your stakeholders. And again, take responsibility, own it. The organization's leadership should take full responsibility for the moral failing, even if it involves difficult admissions. Avoid shifting blame or making excuses, as this further damages the credibility, and you have no wiggle room for that in a moral crisis. Number 2, offer a sincere apology by expressing genuine regret. We all know, even on an interpersonal level, a heartfelt apology is key to beginning any type of healing. It's the same within business. The apology should address those affected by the failing and acknowledge the harm caused while expressing sincere regret. And number 3, you want to communicate openly. Share the full story. Don't omit details, but share the full story. I mean, as much as you can without, releasing any type of classified information or anything that will, further hurt the competitiveness of your company, but share the full story. Share with your stakeholders what happened and how it happened, and then keep them informed by providing regular updates. And it's a painful thing to do, but we got to do it. Leadership is tough. And this is one of those situations where you just got to take it on the chin and see it through to completion. Number 4, take immediate corrective actions. Take swift and visible action to correct the wrongdoing. And implement reforms that address the root causes of that failing. And number 5, demonstrate commitment to change through long-term changes that reflect the commitment to ethical behavior and demonstrates the organization's integrity. This could involve cultural shifts within the organization, changes in leadership, which is something that I know we've all seen when things happen within the organization, or new initiatives aimed at promoting ethical practices. And then continuous improvement. Show that the organization is not just making a one-time change, but is committed to continuous improvement by regularly reviewing and updating policies and practices to ensure they align with the ethical standards that are being communicated. And this is one I really like. Engage in active listening. Seek feedback. Again, like I mentioned earlier, it's tough, but seek feedback from your stakeholders because it helps identify areas where trust may still be lacking and where further action on your part may still be needed. Take that feedback seriously and address any remaining concerns. When organizations demonstrate that they are open to feedback, it helps to rebuild the trust. And this is what we're trying to do after a moral failing. Number 7, foster an ethical culture. Reinforce the organization's commitment to ethical values through training, communication, and leadership by example. Encourage a culture where ethical behavior is recognized and rewarded. Ensure that all employees from top leadership all the way down are held accountable for their actions. Because again, this helps to rebuild the trust internally and externally to the organization. And you want to, again, lead by example. Leaders must model the ethical behavior that they expect from others. And this includes making fair decisions and demonstrating integrity. Leaders should be visible and approachable during this recovery process. This is no time to seal yourself off in your office and put your head down until it blows over. You got to be out there and be actively involved in restoring the trust because this makes a significant difference in how the organization overcomes this moral failing. Number 9, rebuild relationships. Take proactive steps to rebuild relationships with stakeholders who have lost trust. You can win them back, hopefully. This could include personal outreach, rebuilding a partnership, and again, communal initiatives. You can offer initiatives or programs that demonstrate the organization's renewed commitment to its values, excuse me, which could also include customer appreciation efforts, employee engagement programs, or community outreach again. And number 10, almost done, y'all. Commit to transparency and accountability moving forward. So if the organization has not been practicing transparency and accountability all along, make sure from this point forward that you do so. And one way to do this is by open reporting in operations, decision-making. This involves financial reporting, sharing internal audit results, or regular updates on ethical practices with your stakeholders. And consider engaging third-party auditors to review and report on your practices. And again, this external validation or this third-party validation helps restore confidence among your stakeholders. Number 11, you want to celebrate. We all love to celebrate, especially me. Celebrate milestones of recovery. Acknowledge the progress. As the organization makes progress in rebuilding the trust, celebrate these milestones publicly. This not only boosts morale amongst the organization's employees, but it also shows the stakeholders that the organization is on the right path. And be sure to share these success stories. Communication about your organization is all, the rage on social media. Share these success stories. Highlight examples of how the organization has successfully implemented changes, improved its practices, or rebuilt relationships. Again, this further helps to rebuild the organization's credibility after a moral failing. Number 12, be patient and be persistent. This is a long-term thing, y'all. It's a marathon, not a sprint, because restoring trust and credibility requires patience and persistence. It takes time for stakeholders to fully regain confidence in your organization and stop giving you the side eye. And stay the course, even when the progress seems slow or not going as fast as you think it should. It's important to remain committed to the principles of transparency, accountability, and ethical behavior. Stay persistent. And then lastly, learn and adapt. Conduct a thorough review of the moral failing and the recovery process. Identify those lessons learned and capture them so that you can apply them to future challenges before they become a crisis. Use the crisis as a catalyst for positive change, continuously adapting and improving the organization's approach to ethics and leadership. So by following these steps, leaders can begin the difficult process of restoring trust and credibility after a moral failing. This requires humility, a huge amount of humility, honesty, again, huge amount of honesty, and a deep commitment to making things right. But with time and effort, trust can be rebuilt and the organization can emerge stronger. So, as we bring today's episode, Leadership During Moral Crises, to a close, it's clear that how leaders navigate these challenging situations can define not only their legacy, but also the future of their organizations. We've explored what constitutes a moral crisis, discussed strategies for managing and mitigating these crises ethically, and looked at the difficult but crucial process of rebuilding trust and credibility after a moral failing. Moral crises are inevitable in leadership. They test our values, our resolve, our commitment to doing what's right, but they also, more importantly, offer an opportunity for growth, reflection, and positive change. The way we respond to these crises can strengthen the bonds of trust, renew our sense of purpose, and ultimately lead to a more resilient and ethical organization. Remember, leadership is not about being perfect. It's about being principled. It's about facing challenges head on, acknowledging our mistakes, and taking deliberate actions to restore integrity. As leaders, our responsibility is to guide our organizations through these tough times with honesty, transparency, and commitment to the greater good. Thank you for joining us in this important discussion. I hope you leave with a deeper understanding of how to lead with integrity, especially when the stakes are high. Until next time, continue to lead by example. Stay true to your values, and remember that the way you handle a crisis can set the stage for lasting organizational success. If today's discussion on leadership during moral crisis resonated with you, it's time to take proactive steps in your own leadership journey. Start by reflecting on your values and the ethical principles that guide your decisions. Ask yourself, how would I handle a moral crisis? Am I prepared to lead with integrity, even when the going gets tough? I challenge you to commit to transparency, accountability, and ethical decision-making in all aspects of your leadership. Share these principles with your team, create a culture where honesty and responsibility are valued, and be the example others look up to in times of uncertainty. Do not wait for a crisis to test your leadership. Start building trust and credibility today. Discuss what you've learned with your colleagues and consider implementing some of the strategies we've talked about today. Remember, it's not just about managing a crisis when it happens, but it's about fostering a strong ethical foundation that can withstand any challenge. Let's make a collective commitment to lead with integrity, no matter what. Share this episode with your network, please, and join the conversation on social media using #MoralLeadership. Together, we can create a future where ethical leadership is the standard, not the exception. Thank you again for being a part of this important conversation, and let's continue to push for excellence and integrity in everything we do. So that's a wrap for today's episode. I hope our discussion has provided you with valuable insights and practical strategies to navigate those challenging moments with integrity and resilience. Remember, the true test of leadership isn't just in how we handle success, but it's in how we respond to adversity. Thank you for tuning in again and being part of this important conversation. Stay committed to your values, lead with transparency, and always strive to do what's right, even when it's difficult. Big thank yous to my producer, Ms. Moxie Rogers, for keeping me on target. Please tune in for a new series titled Fostering Fearlessness, Building Courage to Uphold Standards on Thursday, September 19th, 2024 at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The episode title is The Anatomy of Courage in Leadership. You won't want to miss it. Have a great day, and remember, true leadership shines brightest in the face of challenge. This is Dr. Vaughn signing off. Until next time, stay strong, stay ethical, and continue to lead by example. Bye. You have been listening to Leading by Example, Upholding Standards Without Compromise. I am your host, Dr. Vaughn, bringing you inspiring excellence, one lesson at a time. Tune in to Transformation Talk Radio every first and third Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific for fun, practical, and educational stories as I share lessons, both the good and the bad, that I have learned in my 20 years of leadership and management experience. As we go through and learn these lessons, I would ask you to be thinking about those lessons that you bring that you could share for potential, hey, you may even want to be a guest on our show. So think about those lessons as we continue to explore inspiring excellence one lesson at a time. For more information, please visit www.enterosolutions.com. That's ENTERO.